So this movie, man, I got a lot to say about this movie, but it's going to be very disjointed because sometimes like I'll watch movies and like I tell you I want to break it down like scene for scene, and sometimes if it's too complicated, I'll just go on themes and aspects of it. This movie had me so perplexed. I was just making random notes, and so my thoughts are going to be super random, but I have a bunch of notes on it. But like I said, I don't really watch a lot of reviews. I stopped watching reviews like a few weeks into us doing this, but I do know you reviewed it before because I'm subscribed
I
to it.
have.
It's pop up in my timeline. I didn't see it, but I'm assuming you're pretty familiar with the movie.
Yeah, I'm not overly. I've probably seen it maybe four times in my life. Once, twice now this year, and I reviewed it on my previous channel back in 2012, I think, and then I saw it I think one other time prior to that. So
Okay. Well, you're hopefully if I'm a little perplexed, maybe you can help me out a little bit. But the
I'm
movie,
not going to make any promises on that.
fair enough, fair enough. It starts off with a cold open, which a lot of horror movies do, and it hooked me right away because um, my two favorite genres are film noir and horror. And this had a very much a combination of both of those things, where you have this mystery of like, all right, who was this guy running from? Why did this girl kill him? There's so many questions that pop up. I was like, okay, I can't wait for some answers. I didn't really get them, but it had the horror and the mystery, the murder mystery aspect, which I love. So I love the open to it.
I was kind of similar as you were. It's like, okay, what's this all about? What's going on here? Who are these people? And again, did we get the answers on that? It's
I assumed that the person killed that would be like who we're following. Like, all right,
right.
who? I thought like she would be coming like that was her brother, her boyfriend, or she had no attachment to him. It was just a random death we saw, and she was there for her father, the main actress, which is like
Hmm.
it blew my mind that there was no connection. Um, One thing I saw right away that I liked as well was Elijah Cook Jr. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a
Oh
character
yeah.
actor.
Oh yeah.
He's been in a lot of film noirs that I saw, and I was super excited for him. I didn't realize they just paid for him for like an hour and then he was
Hmm.
gone because he was just like in one scene. But he was great in that scene, though.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I remember him from best from House on Haunted Hill, the original House on Haunted Hill, which I actually watched about a week ago, also. But what I loved about Elisha Cook's one scene in here is it's just so weird. But he had the very first line of dialogue he has in that movie is when he opens the door, and then he describes how he was born, which
I wrote
I,
it down. I wrote it down so
yeah,
you don't have to remember it.
I love that line so much. I actually put that line of dialogue on IMDb in the quote section for this movie. If you see it on there, it's still there. That was done by me about
That
6 years
was
ago.
okay. Here's his monologue, which I wrote down because I loved it just like you did. I'm as old as the hills. Mama delivered me herself. She took me from between her legs. Bloody little mess. She was about to feed me to the chickens, and Daddy said, "Maybe we could use a boy, Lottie." Lottie, I think that was the mother's name. And that's how I came into this world. I was like, what the fuck? Who are you? What the fuck are you talking about? What am I watching?
You know what you should try to do, and I did this myself. Just write that phrase on your personal Facebook wall and just see the comments that you get. I I did that as well.
Oh man, it's crazy. But that was a theme for this movie. There was like a lot of I don't know if like there was like an Edgar Allan Poe influence, but there was like a lot of attempt at poetry in a lot of the narration or in a lot of the dialogue. And this movie had way too much narration, and it was super pretentious. But I loved it because I love pretentious movies. But yeah, the narration was over the top, and the way people talked was just so unnatural. Like who talks like this? I have a few more lines that I wrote down. I'll splice them in throughout the review, but here are just a couple that caught my fancy as well. Faces haunt me, pale women with sleepless eyes. What does that mean? I walked down the beach that morning, like I'm sure he must have. this is the main actress talking about her dad. This one killed me too because I paused the movie to figure out what the hell this meant. Um, the art dealer was blind. Her fingers moved like a pale spider over my face. What does a pale spider? What does that mean?
There's a lot about this movie that you just shake your head. You like, you got me, but I think we both enjoyed it. So
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't know if I enjoyed it ironically or genuinely. I did enjoy it though. It was an interesting movie. Arletty is the name of the main character, which is a very odd name. I don't even remember if they called her by her name. Like I noticed it like maybe like the last third of the movie. I was like, wait a minute, what is this girl's name anyway? And then when Tom came in and he called for her, that's when I heard it. But I don't know if she was really called by her name much in the movie at all, which makes sense because no one in town really knew her, so they wouldn't
right,
call her anything. But I don't
right.
remember like her introducing herself much at all. But it was just an odd name that just stuck out to me. But what I mean, we're talking about the movie roundabout, but like the influences on this movie, like I couldn't really nail it. I knew they were trying to be artistic with it, but I didn't get what the influences were. Obviously, maybe there were ghouls or supposed to be zombies, so you would think Night of the Living Dead had an influence on it. Maybe I Am Legend, because this gets categorized as a vampire movie at times where you go online. It felt Lynchian with the artistic stuff they were trying to do. It felt Lovecraftian.
It's obviously a horror movie. But I, like you said, I can't figure out what's going on here. Are they zombies? Are they vampires? Are
They're
they
cannibal.
because
That's the only thing we know for sure. But
but
what
they're,
kind of
yeah, clearly
cannibals?
they're cannibal, but they're just acting weird. You know, I mean, they're around in the daytime, weren't they? I think they were, yeah,
Mhm.
and they're
Yeah,
around at night. Um, I'm a kind of at a loss. I really don't know how to answer that. Even when, you'll get to it later when she finds what she's looking for. And I'm really stunned. I don't know what these. They were jumping through windows later on too. Your typical zombies are slow and they don't move much. These guys seem to have a little fight in them.
yeah, yeah. It's
But
weird.
but I was gonna say they act like in a pack too, like in that movie theater scene. They obviously have their target in there, but they don't necessarily move after her right away. They're just sitting there watching the movie, calm, and then eventually they'll get to go. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
strange.
It's very strange. It had a little Mary Celeste in that with the ghost ship thing, where it's like they're waiting for their captain, and it had Edgar Allan Poe, Lovecraft, Lynch. It had a little bit of the fog in there as well. It's
Hmm.
just like it was just seemed all over the place. So I researched a little bit on it, and from what I read, I'm sure you probably came across this as well. One of the actresses in it, Anitra Ford, she was saying that the movie was unfinished. It was called The Second Coming. It was an unfinished movie, and then someone took it and then finished it. This is something like maybe like The Pit, where it's just like maybe there was one vision, then there was another vision, and then it was like a confusing movie, and then the confusion made it more intriguing than if it would have been finished one way and then finished another way, but like melding two visions made it a little bit more confusing and maybe a little bit more intriguing because there's no clear vision of it. Maybe that's why it's so interesting. But it kind of makes sense because even before I researched it, once I saw the end of the movie, I saw her in the water and it seemed like she was going to drown because it was like she couldn't get to the boat and she wouldn't go back to the shore to get killed by them. And then it cut, and then there was narration and her just sitting there. It really seemed like a tacked on ending. Like they just like either they changed the ending, they didn't film the end, but the ending didn't really match up with what was going on. We didn't see them take her out the water because that obviously wasn't the planned ending, and nothing. And also the footage, it was really slowed down to fit the length of the narration. So that scene where she was sitting there wasn't meant to be that long, but they needed to, explain the end. So
Yeah, I
it
got you.
really felt like it felt tacked on. But knowing that, if that story is true, it makes sense that this was an unfinished maybe art film that was then bought and turned into a horror film.
Yeah, my overall thought on the ending there was, again, I don't know if I've interpreted it correctly. I don't know. My thought was, okay, she seems to be in some sort of mental hospital now. Was it all a dream? Was it all in her head? Everything? And that's kind of the impression I was leaning toward, but it's so hard to know. I don't know.
Yeah. So another thing I read was that the guy who played Tom, and it's weird they call him Tom, but it's spelled Thom. So I
Yep.
don't know, like I don't know. Maybe it's when it's spelled like that the H is silent. I don't know. That actor was saying that his character was meant to be the Messiah, like he was going to play that character. Maybe that's true, and he was meant to play it in the original version, and that would make sense because he does tell a story that leads into like him possibly being the Messiah when they're relating to each other, and also he does become the love interest, and it's like, why is this girl special? Why are we following her? There has to be a reason, like you know, like why is the story centered around her? What's there like her being like the chosen one to be his wife? Maybe that would make more sense because then him in his like his normal form would say, hey, like try to fall in love with her and then reveal I'm the Messiah or whatever. And it will also make sense because then he would be part of the story. But without that, the Messiah in the title of the movie doesn't really play a role, you know, in the movie. There's no main bad guy, and it, you know, otherwise it doesn't really make sense.
I never even thought of him as a Messiah, to be honest with you. But uh, my initial thought was, okay, he's somehow connected to whatever's going on in this town. He's got these two ladies hanging around with him for just almost like putting him up on a pedestal, I guess you could. I was kind of thinking that. But ultimately, we find out that he has nothing. I don't know who those people were, why they were there, and why were they hanging around with Elisha Cook in the beginning. I again, there's just so many questions on this movie that I can't even begin to fathom or come up with decent answers. This movie got a nice Blu-ray treatment, I think, in the last year or so, and I saw some comments online, people talking about this movie, and nobody seems to quite understand. Most people genuinely kind of enjoy it, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding this one as to what the hell they're trying to make here.
Yeah. I did like a few scenes he had with the lead actress, Arletty. The zipper scene was pretty funny, where he's like, my zipper's stuck, you know, and then when she unzips it, he's like, well, you don't just unzip a guy and say goodnight. I thought that was pretty funny. I also thought his zipper was going to be the other zipper, but
Hmm.
obviously it was his jacket, not his pants. I also loved it when she couldn't sleep, and then she came running towards the bedroom, and he was like, hey, come to bed, come to bed. And he lifted up the sheet, and then she started coming, and he was all excited. Then she sat all the way across from him. Then he just dropped it, and he was all dejected. I just laughed out loud with that. That was super hilarious. But yeah, I thought his character was kind of interesting if it was going to lead to somewhere. If he ended up being the Messiah, that would have been interesting. But otherwise, and they would have explained like maybe why the girls were following him, because if he's a Messiah, quote unquote, then you could see like why he would manipulate people, and you could say, okay, that makes sense. Maybe he just manipulated these women like he manipulated his followers, you know. But
Hmm.
otherwise than that, with no explanation of like why they're following him, and the girls that were there, they were very paper thin as well. Like I barely even found out their names before they died. I barely found out the girl who died in the theater was Joy until like maybe the scene before she died. They had no personalities or anything to them at all. But you did bring up the movie theater scene. I actually like that sequence a lot, because of the way it played out. She went into the theater. As soon as she went in, they flipped the sign over to closed. She goes in, it's virtually empty, and as she's watching the movie, unbeknownst to her, people are piling into the theater. And she turns around and she sees like this crowd, and she sees people sitting beside her with their eyes bleeding. She goes to run, and the door is locked. And then, like you said, they're sitting there. They seem organized. They don't seem like blood thirsty cannibals or zombies. They seem organized, like they planned this out. Another reason why I liked it is there was no fucking narration, because it was just so much overly narrated, overly explained stuff. That entire sequence was virtually no dialogue, and it was just like the sound of the movie playing, the sounds of her screaming, and otherwise in that silence. I really thought that was like one of the better parts of the movie.
Yeah, and I think you could say the same for the grocery store scene too. I don't think there was any narration there either. Um, yeah, again, I'm trying to, I'm just trying to grasp this all because they seem so calculated and so slow. You'd think if they're hungry cannibals, they're a little more like, okay, we got her. There's 40 of us. There's one of her. She ain't gonna get away. Let's just go get her. But no, they just take their time. And I don't understand the bleeding eyes. Um, Again, I'm just kind of at a loss here. Wanted to ask you, what did you think about the scene? I think the guy was an albino, the actor. We see him in the beginning of the movie in the gas station. He gives her a ride when he eats that mouse.
I thought it was creepy up until he bit it, and then they put in the apple sound.
I eat them, that's what I do with them. I've got another, if you'd like.
I'm like, is this a comedy? And I can sympathize because sometimes it's hard to get good Foley when you're doing low budget movies. And I remember I did this movie called The New York Butcher. It was with Erin Brown, and we reviewed Lust for Dracula, I think, or was the movie we reviewed that she was in.
Yeah.
But I didn't know, there was some scene, I forgot what scene it was, and I didn't know, I couldn't find a good Foley sound. And there's a website called Sound Dogs where they just give you like Hollywood sounds. So I put in the Hollywood sound. But what you don't realize is with some of these Hollywood sounds, when Hollywood put in sound effects in their movies, and you'll probably notice this more after I tell you this, there's usually always a score or a song playing when there's like fighting sounds or things like that. Because if you just put those punching sounds or fighting sounds without music, they sound ridiculous. Because like punches don't sound like that. Punches barely sound like anything. They maybe sound like that, but that doesn't work in a movie. So it has to be these bombastic like clangs and stuff like that. And I did that in a movie without music, and it just sounded ridiculous. And at the screening, people were just laughing. I'm like, oh God, this wasn't intended to be funny, So, but yeah, so I can understand like Foley being an issue, but for them to put in like an apple biting sound or like a crunching sound when he bit into that mouse, I just started laughing. Before that, I thought it was creepy because, I mean, not to mock albinos, but he didn't look funny, but he looked odd.
Yeah, definitely.
And he's a very large guy. And hey, we know how certain people react to large, big black guys. Even other black people sometimes are intimidated by them. He's this large, hulking guy. He's albino. He has the blonde hair, and he's odd looking. And then he has these gnarly teeth, and he's biting into this mouse. I thought it was great up until I heard that crunch sound. I thought they were building him up to be like the henchman of the main bad guy, and then he would eventually take her to like an Igor type, where he would take her to like, here's the master, here's the messiah. I thought he would play a bigger role, but after that scene, I think he was sitting in the theater, and that was it for him for the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I watched this film, that scene, I mean, that was like the first scene that kind of just blew me away, and we was like, what the hell is going on here? Little did I know.
Yeah. Little did you know you wouldn't be any more clued in as to what the hell was going on after that.
But it's so weird. I love that scene. It just comes at you. You don't see it coming, and all of a sudden, boom. You know something's odd about the guy, but that's weird.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that was kind of disappointing, because this movie was a low-budget horror movie, and it was made in the 70s, and it had these young, attractive women. There was no nudity. You'd expect like some of that, when you have these half-naked women running around. at an era where nudity was not an issue and in a low budget horror movie. So that was a little bit disappointing. I'm not sure if it was the actress's idea or maybe they were going artsy and they didn't want to go there, but that was a little disappointing.
Yeah, I know. I think that there may have been a quick nipple if you look closely enough, but both of those actresses I know have done nude scenes before. I've seen them, so yeah, who knows?
Yeah. One thing that I did stand out to me that I really liked was the artwork. Because her father is an artist, and I thought the art was really good. The optical illusion aspect of it, the escalator looked real. The bathroom where the rows of people sitting down, that looked very cool, especially when they had the actress sit down next to the wall painting. It literally looked like rows of people were sitting right like down from her.
Right.
So I thought the art in the house that was supposed to be her father's house was really, really cool looking. The movie seemed to wander a little bit. It didn't really seem focused. Once we got established right away, she's there to find her father. That was it. It was just from there. It was just scene after scene of just like no real goal of the movie. It just seemed to meander at that point.
I don't know what much more to add to that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously she's there to find her father, and yeah, it's meandering scenes, like you said. It's just a lot of weirdness. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. There's a film that came out maybe a few years after this one. I don't know if you've ever seen and heard of it, called Let's Scare Jessica to Death. To me, that film has a lot of similarities to this one, where you got like a town full of weird people who are obviously all in on something. We don't exactly know what, and I don't know if we ever get any clear answers in that one either, but check that out sometime if you can. It's a very, very similar, even with the ending and the water and stuff, it's very similar, and you just don't quite know, but the town, something's going on. Very similar movie.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of the movie. I haven't seen it though. One other thing that kind of that stuck out to me in a really good way, speaking of the father, was the way he died. And Hitchcock kind of mentioned this in an interview where he was talking about filmmaking, is that he says that you want to use tools that the character would use. And I thought it was kind of poetic and interesting the way she killed the father, in that he was an artist. The whole movie we haven't seen him, but we've seen his artwork, because a lot of the movie takes place in his house with all the art that I mentioned before. And he gets killed by the tools of his art. I love freak out scenes in movies. And when he freaks out and starts knocking the paint all over himself, and he's covered in the paint and the varnish, and he's just like running after her and these covered in the glob of paint. And then ironically, the paint made him flammable, and the varnish. So when she threw the fire on him, he was killed by the tools of, the instruments that he used in his life. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Whether that was meant to be kind of like deep and artsy, I don't know, but the movie does try to be artsy, so maybe it was intentional, but I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard or not, but I think there was a little explanation there as to what was happening, because if you listen as or just prior to burning, or maybe after he starts burning, you hear Elisha Cook, one of his lines of dialogue from earlier in the movie. He's like, "You got to burn them. You got to burn them." So I got the impression that, okay, Elisha Cook somehow knows whatever these creatures are, that's how you stop them. You burn them. So.
Mm-hmm. How could I not? They literally cut in the footage in between the scene, They wanted to make sure if you didn't remember, this is why it's there. I remember because I'm a big Elijah Cook fan, so I literally wrote down his dialogue, so I remembered. But yeah, if you didn't remember, they literally cut the footage in right there for you. So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. But yeah, I guess my main thing was, I guess that the movie kind of made more sense once I read up on it online after watching it. But if you're just going to watch this and not do any research, it's kind of like doesn't really add up and it's really confusing. But if you take into account that Tom was supposed to be the Messiah, then okay, that fills in some blanks. That's why she's living, is because he chose her to be his bride. That's why these women are following, because he's this Messiah, he's this religious leader, he has people following him, and maybe he has some mind control over those two girls, and they weren't like the chosen brides. For whatever reason, they didn't make the cut. And maybe if they would have finished it, he would have explained that, hey, well, Joy didn't cut it because she wasn't a virgin, or this, maybe it's some kind of like evil villain monologue. He could have explained like why those girls didn't make the cut, but she made the cut, and you're my bride or whatever. And maybe then it would have, made sense, but who knows? Who really knows?
Yeah, perhaps. I'm thinking the title of the movie, Messiah of Evil, is he supposed to be a bad guy? Because obviously he died at the end of this movie. We assume he drowned. Again, I don't know.
Well, in this version, I'm talking about what would have been if.
Okay.
But as far as like, are we talking about what the movie was or what the movie could have been? Because Tom, in the version we saw that's on screen, Tom's a good guy. The Messiah, we just see in a robe for like 2 seconds, So I don't know. As far as the movie goes, the Messiah is alive, and the Messiah is in the movie for like 2 seconds. We never even see his face. So
there's a lot of unanswered questions here too. Who knows?
Yeah. There was another line in there that I really liked. When the girls were fighting over Tom and him liking the lead actress, Joy was like, "Oh, he's just farting around with her." I just thought that was
Yep.
he's just farting. Okay, I wrote down more lines, but I mean, I'll just stop there. I mean, people can watch the movie themselves. You guys get the point. Any other final thoughts on the movie?
No, again, I'm not sure what to make of this one. I always kind of enjoyed it since the first time I saw it. It's just so weird, but I dig this movie. I really do. It's just I don't know what to make of it, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I like it. It's just so darn strange.
Yeah, I guess that's why there was so much voiceover, because the guy who probably bought he's like, "What the fuck is this?" and probably just added the voiceover to try and make it make more sense. But the voiceover was really redundant. I think they could cut a lot of that out, and the movie wouldn't miss a beat. I did like the progression of how Arletta started changing, where she sees the painting bleeding through the eyes. She sees the blood red moon. She starts not feeling pain from when her hand gets burned. She starts bleeding through the ear, then she bleeds through the eye. That gradual progression of her turning, it would have been nice if it led somewhere, because she did all that turning, but then she's sitting in the seance, wherever she's sitting, just perfectly fine like a normal human being. But when everyone else starts turning, they turn into zombies. So it would have been nice if all that turning, either she turned into something or she did something to turn back. But all that buildup, which I thought was really good, it's like she's confused, like, what's happening to me? Why is this happening? Am I going crazy? But the buildup led to absolutely nothing, because she didn't turn into anything. She was just perfectly fine. So that was kind of weird. A few other quick notes. There was the ugliest quilted blanket I've ever seen in my life in this movie. It was black and had these flowers on it. It looked so 70s. And I saw it early in the movie, and then I was like, I hope they don't show that blanket again. It's so distracting. But at the end, where she's like covering up Tom, it's just like in the scene for like forever. But I don't know. People can look for that if they like Easter eggs. But that was kind of like funny and distracting. Another thing I noticed was one of the extras really fucked himself up when he jumped through the ceiling. You can see he clearly slammed into the wall and then fell backwards. And I was like, oh shit, that guy's hurt. There's some place overseas where they did a lot of action movies in the 70s.
Philippines, maybe?
The Philippines, yes. There's a lot of like low budget action Philippines movies, where it's like a bunch of, like American female models in like bikinis, and they're like taking over the world. But they'll have like these elaborate action sequences that were just like no precautions were taken, and you can literally see people are like breaking arms and legs in these scenes. It's like, how did they survive that? So like in these low budget Philippine movies, you'd see or American movies made in the Philippines or whatever, you'd see like a lot of like stunt people getting hurt. So like watching that kind of reminded me of that, because you could tell the stuntman got really hurt. And I think that was it. Yeah, those were the main things I just wanted to get across. I can scrap all my other notes because I have I have like 4 pages of things I wanted to get to, but I think I hit on all the major things. I think we covered everything. Unless you have anything else left to say, we can wrap it.
Yeah, again, I just love the randomness of this movie, and I just cannot get off Elisha Cook's opening scene where it's just so weird and random. You open the door and he introduces himself with the weirdest story ever. So that's my biggest take from this movie.
Whatever they paid him for that hour and a half he was on set was worth every penny.
I'm as old as the hills. Mama delivered me herself. She took me from between her legs. Bloody little mess. Just about to feed me to the chickens. And Daddy said, maybe we could use a boy, Lottie. That's how I came into the world.